Taichi Tanaka, a real-life sucker who's 38 years old, logs into a new VRMMO game called One More Free Life Online. There he creates a character called Earth. He chooses the most underleveled skills available, including medicine brewing, archery, kicking, and wind magic, to not stand out. Here begins his average, boring VRMMO life. Taichi Tanaka is a 38-year-old man who's single to a stupor. He works a regular job and earns a regular salary. After his daily work, he logs into a new virtual reality multiplayer game called One More Free Life Online. He creates his character known as Earth in the game. There, he gives the character different visual customizations. He gives his character useless skills and abilities such as archery and potion making. This is because he wants to play solo. In the game, you're free to move around and do whatever stupid things you want to do. There's no special final quest or any other bullshit. He comes across a goofball bully and his crew of twats. They bully him for using archery, which is a useless skill. Afterward, Earth heads over to the training room to test out his archery. He discovers the skill is a hot piece of dog shit.
What?
And even worse than expected. After a few hours of practice, he improves his archery and kicking skills. After a while, he heads out to hunt, but discovers he's not built for this. He then settles to pick potions. He goes out to a field and picks some plants, even though his dumbass isn't sure what they are exactly. Subsequently, he uses his starting case to buy a beginner's crafting set from a potion store. He makes some common health potions and some antigenic potions. He knows that other players won't buy from him because they can get them from NPCs cheaply. Shortly after that, the weakling sets out to hunt. He sees a bunny and fires an arrow at it, but the bunny dodges it. He fires another one which eventually hits it, but it doesn't seem to damage it. As the bunny jumps closer to Earth, he kicks the bunny to the moon, eventually killing it. Two other players see this and come to him. They introduce themselves as Millie and Zwei, although Zwei is a stupid clown. They send him friend requests much against his wish because he wants to play solo. They eventually bid goodbye to him. Earth continues to hunt more animals and the bozo gets the hang of it. He uses his sneak skills to be more effective at the hunt. He realizes the combination of his sneak skill and archery is devastating in hunting the animals. Back in real life, Taichi logs out of the game. Later in the game, he purchases some food in the game which tastes like it was marinated in a mix of motor oil and broken promises. He sets out to make his food. His first attempt at making his steak feels as hard as a rock, with the taste of stale cardboard. His second attempt is mid but can be better. While making his third attempt, the aroma of the steak spreads everywhere in the game. They rush towards him like ants rushing sugar and ask him to make for them too, for a price. At the end of the day, the activity increases his cooking skills to level 20. Later that day, he makes an improved bow and arrow. He heads over to the store to buy some armor with the money made earlier. He then sells some potions in the public inventory. Afterward, he uses his newly acquired bow and arrow to rain death on the poor animals. Shortly after, a buy hits the game, which makes the player unable to buy potions and medicines from the NPCs. It turns the game into a pandemonium party, since most of the players don't have potion skills because they think it's a trash skill. They beg Earth to make skills for them, and they don't mind paying whatever amount. With the help of Zwei and Millie, he mass-produces the potions and sells them. Later, the bully from earlier tries to cut in line and forcefully gets some potions from Earth, but Earth mops the floor with his ass. Back in real life, Taichi logs out. Several days have passed since the potions incident, and medicine is no longer considered a useless skill. In the game, Zwei introduces him to the rest of his guild called Blue Color. The members include Nora, who's good with melee combats, Rage, who's a tanker and uses an axe and a shield, and lastly, Kazumina, who's a swordsman like a low-budget samurai. They tell him they are going to hunt a wild bear, a tough opponent that makes Earth wet his pants. They tell him they are confident in killing the bear because they have him, which makes him go bananas. Eventually, they get to the wild bear's location. Earth uses his long-distance vision to spot a lone bear that their weak asses can take on. They plan on luring it away and then fighting it together. Earth splits from the group and hits the bear with an arrow to get its attention, but the arrow doesn't do any damage to it. The bear charges at Earth, but his ass is saved by Rage. The other guys combine their attacks against the bear, but despite the relentless barrage of attacks, it is like the blows are mere mosquito bites on the bear's hide. They realize their dumbasses didn't think their plan through. Earth fires an arrow on the bear's forehead, which he thought was the weak point, but it merely tickles the bear. Earth then plays his final card, which is Sakari Ventus, a wind booster spell. This eventually weakens the bear, and the rest of the team finishes it off. After that, Earth makes a dish for their bottom pits, which they call stomachs. He then explains to them how it's impossible to buy recipes because of their uniqueness. He adds that traders don't even trade recipes. They all express joy in Earth being part of their nonsense guild. After a while, Earth sets out to explore the 5th area, and the rookie thinks he's up for it. He fires his arrow at a giant rock ant the size of the Hulk's foot. Unsurprisingly, it doesn't do any damage. Earth then drops a kick at it, but the ants and his friends get his ass handed to him. This kills him, and he's given a penalty for dying. After his ass gets respawned in the town, the game announces a major update called the Fairy Ball. Fairies will be introduced, which can support them as they play. After working his ass off, he picks up blacksmithing skills. He makes an arrowhead that can pierce the rock ant's skin. He merges different types of iron to make the arrow tip, which can kill the ants. Secondly, he crafts a special pair of boots that he can use to stomp the ants to death. The boots have special blades on the sides. The other blacksmiths are confused as to the purpose of the boots, but they admit it's pretty cool and badass. Subsequently, he purchases a bowstring from the store for his newly crafted bow. Because his archery level has reached level 30, he plans to make a good hunting bow which fits his style of play. He finally creates the bow, which looks like something out of Skyrim. The next day, the noobster visits the forest again to hunt the rock ants. This time around, with his shiny new toy, he lays waste to the ants, killing them all. He plans on using their strong exoskeleton to forge armor. Not long after, the first half of the Fairy Ball starts. He's given a contract crystal, but he receives bloody nothing.
Hey yo, what the fuck?
This breaks his heart, which is even made worse when his friends Zwei and the rest show up with their fairies. They tell him not to despair, and he still has a chance during the second half of the event. But they are all surprised why all their fairies surround Earth and embrace him. Earth notices fairies have been weirdly attracted to him, but he can't make a contract with any of them because his contract crystal is broken. He notices his skill levels have gone up. The fearless fool then sets to explore a dark dungeon. He comes across a giant spider, like something from a horror movie. He launches his bow and wind attacks, but it barely scratches the spider. He tries to make a jump attack, but he hits his big head at the ceiling. He then uses a whip to drag the spider, and he then unleashes a furious kick, a move that would make Liu Kang jealous, killing the spider. Some dark fairies appear and lead him to a small secret door. He opens the loot inside the door to see a ring. He takes the ring and thanks the fairies. Almost immediately, the game announces the second half of the Fairy Ball is about to start. The name is the Fairy Battle Tournament. At the town square, the game tells the players they have the chance to upgrade their fairies by winning PvP fights. And those who failed to make a contract in the first phase, like the zero-skill Earth, have a chance to get their fairies. Earth notes that many people are noobs at PvP, and he hopes they don't start targeting craftspeople who are terrible at combat. But his blacksmith friend called Blacks tells him not to worry. He explains that the craftspeople have no intention of fighting, and if any of them are challenged, the rest will fight alongside. During the update, each player is given a title that they can't unequip. Earth checks his and discovers he's called Fairy Plier. This title describes him as a bitch to the fairies. He feels like a goof and goes down on his knees in shame. He tries to clear the title by trying to engage in a PvP battle and winning. He pathetically begs for someone to play against him until a girl known as Rona shows up. She introduces herself as also being part of Zwei's guild. She tells him he knows him and she's been waiting to meet him. Suddenly, Rona's fairy flies to Earth, which surprises both of them since her fairy is socially selective. Then the fairy decides not to fight Earth, much to his annoyance. He tries to fight different other people, but their fairies all refuse to fight against him. Long after, Earth cooks for half the server fairies because the fairies won't eat the bread sold by the NPCs, and the fairies particularly find his food a lip-smacking delight. The overwhelming demand for his food makes Earth blow a fuse. This makes him angry because he's now well known, and his plan initially wasn't to stand out. Eventually, Rona assists him before he loses his marbles. Thereafter, they both head over to the newly opened town called Nexia. This is where the PvP duels will take place. They observe a battle in which one player's fairy is as stubborn as a mule facing down a freight train and won't obey its owner's command. This eventually makes the owner lose the duel. Earth presumes the player is a slave fairy user, assholes who abuse their fairies. He explains that if a player abuses his fairy too much, They will have to face it in a battle as a form of penalty. Earth then bids farewell to Rona. Later that day, the player earlier whose fairy disobeyed comes to Earth for help. He asks him to teach him how to get his fairy back to his side. Earth lectures him that he's to be less of an asshole and treats his fairy as his friend. After that, a strange, huge character known as Silver shows up and tells Earth they need to talk. Earth and Silver finally get to a place to talk. Due to Silver's appearance and gear, Earth deduces he's a high-ranking player. Silver warns Earth of a player called Glad. Glad used to be a member of his guild, but his ass was kicked out because he got arrogant. Silver explains this is because he was the only one who failed to make a contract with a fairy. Silver warns Earth that Glad is targeting players who have the fairy player title such as him. He also tells him Glad has now got a dark fairy wolf, and the diabolical doofus is challenging others to special PvP duels. Because it's against the rules of the game to challenge another player to PvP duels while they hunt, Earth uses the opportunity to hide like a mouse in a cheese factory. During the hunt, he kills a wild bear single-handedly. Later that day, he hunts for ore like a detective on a high-profile case in the mines near Nexia. He discovers an explosive ore which he can craft with. Later that night, he plans to make a new arrowhead and a metal whip. The arrowhead is twisted so it can dig into flesh more easily. He sounds the entire night making the arrowhead as if it were a life-or-death mission. Finally, he finishes the whip too. Shortly after he gets started on the explosive ore, he admits that even in the real world he's not technical, and so for once in his mediocre life, he'll have to use his head. Using his medical skills, he manages to create 3 different samples of the explosions to test which one will produce the best boom boom. He goes outside to test the explosive samples. He launches the first sample but doesn't ignite a nonsense disappointment. He launches the second sample, which makes an explosion that would make Oppenheimer proud, but it's too powerful for Earth. He launches the last sample, which creates the perfect kaboom. Using his newly crafted weapons and explosives, he helps a wild bear achieve its final hibernation by killing it. Afterward, he makes huge upgrades to his wind magic and arrow skills. Later that day, Zwei moans like a baby to Earth that nobody in their guild made the final 16-player tournament. The game announces that 2 of the 16 players are Silver and Glad, both with ridiculously win streaks. The next day, the special tournament server starts. Earth uses his long-distance vision like Superman to find other fairy player like him. The first battle begins. Earth notices particles of light go from the losing fairy to the winning one, something he's not seen. The tournament continues until the final fight between Silver and Glad, facing off like Professor X versus Magneto. They start their fight with both sides using clever moves, which makes Zwei go bonkers in excitement. Glad uses clever wind magic to get the upper hand and win the battle. Then suddenly, Glad's wolf fairy transforms into a human-like queen. She rejects Glad and says their contract has expired. Glad, with his head boiling like a kettle, rejects this and challenges her to a duel, which she happily accepts. The duel starts and she wipes the floor with his butt.
That was easy.
She displays moves that leave Earth and his friend's jaws dropped, like a dog wanting a bone. She then calls Silver to take over, with which the latter apologizes to Glad for the past. She then calls out the 3 fairy player players, including Earth. She upgrades the 2 fairies, but since Earth doesn't have any fairy, there's nothing to upgrade. She then challenges Earth to a duel which almost makes him piss his pants. She explains that she's challenging him because he didn't participate in the event with a fairy at his side, so she can't reward him. She promises to give him some of his power regardless of whether she beats his ass or not. Having seen her fight, Earth knows he will need to fight dirty. The fight later got underway. Earth uses a combination of his potions, magic, and arrows to get the better of her in the fight. Realizing Earth is taking her to the cleaners, she pulls up a rock shield enclosing her like Tof Beifong. After a while of not sensing Earth, she pulls down the shield, but she is immediately greeted by a whip attack from Earth. After subduing her with the whip, he launches a sliding charge to throw her off balance. Earth then turns her into target practice by firing arrows combo at her. He finally finishes her off with a wind booster kick from above. She thinks her eyes are playing tricks on her and doesn't believe she's getting her ass thrashed. Earth is eventually declared the winner. She admits she's been a bit too full of herself. She demands Earth's broken fairy contract crystal and the mysterious ring he had discovered in that dungeon, which Earth hands over to her. She merges the crystal and the ring into one, forming a magical ring which she shoves onto his finger with the finesse of a bulldozer. She tells him the ring is his reward. The ring contains some of her powers and cannot be unequipped. And with that, the Fairy Ball event comes to an end. Things are a little different after the event. Earth's battle with the Queen was uploaded to the game's official site, and people started to realize how strong the combination of wind magic and archery was. Earth ends up being famous, much to his eternal facepalm. He decides to go somewhere remote, so he can play in peace. Then the Queen teleports to his presence through the ring. She tells the brat she wants to spend time with him. He asks her what a prism nova is, but the Queen tells him to find out for himself. After a series of fooling around, he discovers the prism nova is a spell that afflicts all enemies in the area of effect with multiple random status effects. She tries to eat some of Earth's food, but he slaps her greedy ass away. She complains about the work and stress she faces being the Queen. During the conversation, a cretin appears from nowhere and scolds Earth for ignoring him earlier. He introduces himself as Naza, with the guild called the Bow of Apollo. The asshole scornfully invites Earth to his guild, but Earth just airs him.
I'm here to tell you right now, we don't care.
After that, Earth gives the Queen some food to take home. The next day, as he gets to work, his fellow blacksmiths stare at him like he's the last piece of pizza, because he's now a big shot and famous. At the workshop, Earth wants to upgrade his bow into a more powerful one. He also upgrades his death shoes into an even more deadly one. After finishing, his fellow blacksmiths clap at him like he's a zoo exhibit. That night, he's called by the leader of the Bow of Apollo Guild, Ayama. She apologizes for the stupid behavior of Naza the previous day. She tells him since his victory over the Fairy Queen, everybody has known him. She asks him to join their archer-only guild so that they can grow even bigger. Earth accepts the apology. Somewhere else, some men not in the game suspiciously make comments about Earth and his activities. Back in the game, the devs add new status effects, which are break arms, paralysis, and petrification. The game also adds a new dungeon event called A Challenge from the Departed. Different players will have to team up to explore the Dungeon of Doom and win rewards. Subsequently, Earth looks to make a makeshift bow, which can also function as a shield, putting Captain America and Hawkeye to shame. He uses the materials from the exoskeleton of the ants to make it. This weapon is crucial for Jim, because even if he gets affected with a break arm status effect, his bow won't drop from his arms. After 5 grueling days of toiling like a hamster on a wheel, he finally completes his weapon. The next day, the dungeon tournament starts. Different players come around and buy materials needed for the challenge. Suddenly, some low-budget Power Rangers team jumps forward and shows their transformations, wasting everybody's time. They are red, yellow, green, pink, blue, and black. But Black couldn't show up because his stomach is staging a rebellion. They invite Earth to their dungeon quest because they are short of one member, and Earth agrees to join. They enter the dungeon. Red is about to leap in like a fool, but Earth stops him and the others because the place is a booby-trap bonanza. Using his special vision, he carefully navigates the dumb team on the right path. Subsequently, they come across a group of skeleton soldiers with which the Rangers fight, and they eventually send the skeletons back to the boneyard. Earth is impressed with their fighting skills, and he tells them he will just help them in looking out for traps while they handle the fights. Since the dungeon game time is 1 hour, time is running out to complete the quests. Shortly after, they get to the 3rd floor of the dungeon, where even the cobwebs look like they have given up on life. This time around, they come across some whites and skeleton soldiers. Pink attacks the whites with magic, sending them to the afterlife lost and found. But this group of skeleton soldiers dispel the spell which makes them different from the earlier ones. Green tries to attack some whites, but they're invulnerable to physical damage. Earth steps in and saves his ass. With the help of Pink also, both combine and pummel the enemies into next week. They get to the 4th floor, but Earth feels something eerie like a ghost caressing his face. They hear a shout coming from a door and Red rushes in like a brain-dead turkey, much to Earth's objections. They all eventually get into the room and then the door closes suddenly, like a scene from Escape Room. They see 2 other players in the room in need of urgent support, facing a large group of skeleton soldiers. The gang eventually kicks their bony butt to the curb. After the victory, the other 2 players thank the team. The room clears and a reward chest is dropped. Earth spots the chest as a trap, but the other greedy-ass team refuses. Earth then asks them to open the chest after his team leaves the room. The gang leaves the room and the other team inside opens the chest, killing both of the dumbasses. The game time officially runs out and the players are sent out. They show their appreciation for Earth's support and they plan on sharing the rewards. Later that day, Earth, with the help of Blacks, forges a tool that will make him faster in picking locks. Whilst walking outside, the Queen suddenly appears, which scares the pants off him. She tells him she's tired of giving the new players contract crystals. The next day, Earth makes new arrows that will help in his next dungeon quest. The Queen appears again and asks Earth to sign a marriage form for both of them, but he refuses. After making different sets of tools, Earth explores the dungeon solo like a wannabe Batman. His goal is to improve his lockpicking skills. Sometimes he fails and gets blown up to smithereens, but after some days of training, reaches level 50 in thief skills. He then upgrades his thief skill into a more specialized skill called a benevolent thief. Subsequently, the low-budget Power Rangers show up, this time with Black. Surprisingly, Black and Earth get along well like peas in a pod. Days after, Earth continues to explore the dungeon solo. There, he discovers the monsters like light, so when exploring the dungeon, he goes dark like a Tom Clancy soldier. After some exploration, he gets to the penultimate floor. There, he discovers liches, characters that use status attacks and can also summon nearby monsters, so yeah, they are jerks. Earth tries as much as possible to avoid them. Finally, he sees an entry to the last floor, but the entire floor leading to it is filled with traps that could make a ninja weep. Because there's not enough time to disarm the traps, he leaps and jumps forward like a drunk kangaroo. Although he almost misses it, he manages to jump inside with his face smacking the floor. Getting to the floor, he notices the time has stopped. Earth suspects he is the first ever player to reach the level. He proceeds to walk down the stairway to eternity. There, a voice speaks to him. He introduces himself as Andre, a former knight of the Empire. He narrates to Earth how he and his team were sent to the labyrinth of the departed to seal it away. He led a great army inside, but the monsters and traps turned all of his men into monster chow. Only he survived. Over time, he journeyed across the labyrinth, but there was nothing for him, not even air to breathe. He later died and was transformed into a skeleton knight, forced to protect the dungeon. He asks Earth to kill him because he has suffered for far too long and wants to be freed. Then, suddenly, the stairs Earth is walking on vanish like a magician's cheap trick, making Earth fall like a bag of dirt. There, he comes face to face with the skeleton knight. It laughs like a possessed joker and moves to attack Earth. He's very fast and hits hard, but Earth tries to catch up. It breaks Earth's burrow through a break arms attack. The skeleton knight launches a stun attack against Earth, which leaves him immobile for a moment. The skeleton knight tries to finish him off, but Earth manages to dodge it and counter by hitting him. During the fight, Earth's whip gets broken into pieces like my dreams. Earth uses magic to slow down the skeleton, and during this, he invokes the power of his ring like Hal Jordan and summons the power of the Prism Nova. All these barely affect the skeleton, but as soon as it's about to retaliate, an illusion of the Fairy Queen appears and petrifies the skeleton knight. Earth then finishes him off. A ghost of Andre appears and thanks Earth for freeing him, and as a reward, he gives Earth his sword. Subsequently, the game announces that one of the secret bosses of the dungeon challenge has been defeated, and its sword has been unlocked. The next day, Earth moans his destroyed weapon, acting like it's the end of the world, and not just a busted piece of metal. Knowing he can't repair them, he turns the rest of them into a new shield. Some suspicious characters in the real world seem to be monitoring the game. They note two unknown characters in the game. Zwei and the rest of his guild invite Earth to a dungeon quest. Zwei tells him Nora and Kazumin can't play, so they introduce a new player to Earth, a second healer. They warn Earth that she's a jackass, but Earth doesn't bother. She shows up very late like she's in her time zone. This infuriates Zwei, but he later introduces her as Eliza. Zwei asks Eliza to apologize for her bad character, but she refuses, calling Earth a wimp. Again, Earth doesn't seem bothered and even smiles at her. They enter the dungeon and Earth helps them in picking locks like Robin Hood and setting off traps. They eventually get to the 5th floor and Zwei suggests they have a break. Earth tells them about liches and the team strategies and how they will face them. Earth gets a tingling sensation like Spider-Man about the movement of some monsters towards them. The gang sets their positions and Eliza shivers in fear like a frozen fish. They all combine their attacks at some wights, but it just tickles them. Rage steps forward and uses his skill to shield them for a while. Rona and Zwei combine to kill some wights. Rage's arm becomes petrified and can't move. They ask Eliza to heal Rage, but the scaredy cat is frozen in fear. With the team under immense pressure, Earth uses his explosives to destroy the wights, turning them into ghostly confetti. Earth helps Eliza up and asks her to heal Rage. Remaining their stances, the team finishes the rest of the monsters. After that, The burnout warriors heave a sigh of relief. Eliza then apologizes to Earth. Long after that, the gang finishes their quest, and Earth waves them goodbye. In the shadows, a girl appears and smirks. The next day, a strange girl approaches Earth and asks about him. He notices that the girl has pointed ears, Japanese clothing, and dragon-like horns, an unusual sight and not a player avatar. She tells Earth she's like the Fairy Queen's little sister. She tells him she wants to meet him for many reasons, but one of them is to taste his food. Earth refuses because he's busy, but the girl says she doesn't mind following him around like a lost puppy. Shortly after, Earth goes to the store girl to have her make him a new clock because he's used the life out of the former one. Subsequently, Earth decides to make steak for her, which she devours like a vacuum cleaner at a buffet. Earth asks her if she's a fairy too, since she claims to be the Fairy Queen's sister, but she refuses to talk about it, and she also can't give him her real name. Earth then decides to name her Ryu, which she gleefully accepts. Later, the game makes a major announcement. They announce adjustments in the process of acquiring the highest skills in the game. The next day, Earth retrieves his new shiny cloak and parades around like a peacock. On his way, he comes across the Fairy Queen and some humanoid fairies. She apologizes to Earth that he won't be able to make a contract with a fairy, since 80% of the fairies in the Fairy Kingdom are fighting for him. And to calm their stupid asses down, she decides not to give him to any of them. Earth accepts his fate, and to compensate him, the Fairy Queen gives him 2 additional special powers. She then announces the players will be able to visit the Fairy Kingdom, and she's expecting his arrival. Zwei and his guild meet up with Earth as he's cooking. They all discuss a new ad about some new games. Zwei tries to pick up a steak secretly, but Earth whacks his greedy hands away. They discuss the large influx of new players, which will increase the players' numbers. Zwei asks Earth to join their guide, but again Earth humbly declines. He states that he prefers going solo. From nowhere, Ryu suddenly slinks in like a stealthy raccoon raiding a pantry. She tries to take a steak, but Earth whacks her too. Earth and the glutton battle for the food, which leaves the rest in awe. Earth introduces her as Ryu, but she tells them only Earth can call her that. The next day, the players set off on their journey to the Fairy Kingdom. They all walk until they get to the North Fortress, and they queue up like penguins waiting for their favorite fishy treat. Subsequently, an entourage of the Queen Fairy approaches Earth and asks him to show him the ring on his finger. He recognizes it and introduces himself as the leader of the North Fort. He tells him the Queen Fairy requests his immediate presence. The fort leader brings a pikasha, a huge bird the size of Godzilla's brain, which only a select few fairies are permitted to ride. The bird flies him to the castle, and by evening they get there. On getting there, the Queen Fairy welcomes him. She takes him on a parade through the kingdom which she's specifically created for him. The pikasha carries him throughout the kingdom like a wannabe king, and the fairies cheer him along. Although Earth doesn't want the attention, he decides to take it in. The next day, Earth appreciates the Queen for the warm welcome and tells her might have gone overboard. She insists that it's needed to show him to the fairies. She tells him they would appreciate it if he stayed in their kingdom for a while. Later that night, Earth wants to log off but comes across the Fairy Queen, who asks him to sleep with her on her bed. On hearing this, Earth zooms off like a caffeinated cheetah chasing after its morning espresso, jumping out the window like a thief. The next day, he leaves for the South Fort riding a pikasha. He chooses this side because it's the farthest place from Nexia and will have fewer players. He goes to a tavern where he asks to use their kitchen downstairs. He decides to stay there for a while and also to complete his quests. He turns to Gordon Ramsay from Target and starts to make different varieties of dishes. The aroma of this attracts the attention of other players above. They come to him and ask him to make some of them. Earth then sells the dishes to them, which the gluttony bastards eat up. For the next several days, his activities include finishing up his quests and cooking. Thereafter, an alarm is sounded within the tavern that asks Earth to hide. It's because the fort leader's stupid daughter is on her way there. The doofus demands the presence of Earth, but the tavern keeper lies that he's not around and he's gone. She doesn't believe it initially, but she accepts. After she's gone, Earth is brought out, and the keeper apologizes to him. She reveals that she knows about him, but the Queen had instructed them to act like they didn't know him. Earth bids farewell to them. Later that night, Earth tries to escape the town like a thief. He's aided by some guards who are also tired of the fort leader's daughter shit. He meets a fairy who rides him out. Meanwhile, the Fairy Queen learns about the fort leader's daughter and her chase of Earth. They finally make it into town after riding all night long like musketeers on a top-secret mission. Feeling tired, they look for an inn to stay in. There they meet the innkeeper, who calls the fairy wild-haired Zetan, a name the fairy is not fond of. They head back to their rooms where Earth teases him about the name. Earth afterward goes to sleep. The next morning, the sleepyhead wakes up to find the fairy queen sleeping on him. Zetan and the innkeeper walk in to find the fairy queen, which makes their jaw drop like a trapdoor at a haunted house.
What?
Ryu then shows up almost immediately, which infuriates both sisters. The fairy queen tells Earth she's punished both the fort leader and her stupid daughter. The fairy queen tries to flirt with Earth, which irks Ryu. She grabs her hair like it's the last slice of pizza at a party and drags her ass out. They both come to their senses and bid Earth farewell. Shortly after, a woman enters Earth's room and begs for Zetan's assistance. She tells them her daughter's gone missing and she wants them to find her. She introduces herself as Karen Fenrir. She tells them her daughter, Mina Fenrir, has gone missing after going for her usual walks. Zetan points out that their type can switch between human and wolf, and she should be able to defend herself. Eventually, they accept the job. Earth offers to help as a way of repaying carrying his lazy ass through the night. A while later, they get to the forest where she's reported to have gone. Earth senses some goblins, which they both easily curb stomp. Using his skill, he senses some group of monsters and two non-monsters ahead, which they rush to like it's a Black Friday sale. Shortly after, they get there, and they spot the girl fighting the goblins like a wannabe Wonder Woman. Zetan rushes in and gives the goblins a good thrashing, while Earth administers her a potion to heal her wounds. She appreciates them, and they tell her her mother sent them to rescue her. Earth asks her why she couldn't transform. She explains that when she's going on for her walk, she's ambushed by some goblins and poisoned and couldn't transform. Earth then gives her some potions to remove the effects of the poison, giving her the ability to transform again. After that, Earth tells them to leave and will catch up. He discovers a human behind the whole ordeal, trying to create tension between the humans and the fairies. He tries to fight Earth, but he gets his ass kicked embarrassingly. Following that, they take the girl back to her mother. She pays them handsomely, and Earth asks the mother if her daughter can go out with Zetan, which makes him piss his pants. They accept eventually. Thereafter, Earth gets to his room and summons the fairy queen. He tells her what happened that day between the humans and fairies. They conclude that it's best if they continue their peaceful living. The next morning, Earth leaves the inn and bids farewell to Zetan. He summons Pikasha, who flies him away. Earth returns to the blacksmith shop and crafts a new bow, after his former was pulverized like a potato in a food processor. Shortly after, he goes outside to test the new bow. A pop-up message appears to him and congratulates him for defeating Andre earlier. The message challenges PvP duels against other players that also killed some secret bosses, but Earth rejects the offer like a vegan at a barbecue. There he discovers a baby dragon crying. Earth picks the dragon up and gives it food out of his inventory. He thinks about what to do with the dragon, but he realizes it'll draw unnecessary attention to him like a clown at a business meeting. He decides to give it more food, but it wants more. Eventually, he feeds the dragon enough food to feed a country. Soon after, Earth summons the fairy queen. He shows her the red little dragon, which makes her go bonkers. She explains that it's a huge problem because wild dragons never leave their kingdom, so their terrible power doesn't cause needless conflicts. She explains the difference between wild dragons and normal dragons. Normal dragons have learned how to control their power, while the wild dragons don't give a shit, so they have isolated themselves instead. She adds that the baby they found is a red dragon, which is scarier than the other ones. A fairy arrives to warn them that some red dragons are coming at them. Shortly after, the dragons arrive and interrogate Earth about what he did to their special child. He explains that he just fed their hungry ass child. They take the baby dragon from him and discover Earth is being truthful after seeing the child's memories. They apologize for doubting him and express gratitude. He asks the dragons to not hold the fairy kingdom responsible so that they won't turn the kingdom into a giant oven, and they should forget they ever met him, and then they fly away. The fairy queen appreciates Earth for considering her kingdom. He then orders Pikasha like Uber and flies off into town. A while after, he gets to the town. He enters a tavern to perform some tasks, but he's shocked there are no tasks available. The innkeeper tells him there are no more tasks and offers him jobs he can do within the tavern. Later that night, he works his ass off cooking and serving the guests. He's paid eventually and goes to sleep. The next morning, Earth reminisces about his activities so far in the game and how much fun he's been having. He compares it to his boring childhood and appreciates the experience. After that, he heads to the eastern city where he meets the fairy queen and a strange man. He introduces himself as a green dragon. Green dragons are wild dragons that have the power to control the wind. He continues that green dragons are exceptions from wild dragons, but they are less powerful than the other dragons, but far faster and more agile, and they can take human form too. He explains that he's there because they have a problem with the baby dragon from earlier. The little bastard won't eat any food in the kingdom, and also asks the other dragons to teach him how to be a human. The fairy queen speculates that the possible reason for this is because the little dragon fell in love with Earth's food and only wants to eat his. He decides to give the green dragon a taste of his food, with which the fool gulps like it's a race against time, and hunger always wins. He asks for more, but Earth smacks his hungry head. Earth decides to make some more, which he can take away back to his kingdom. The fairy queen tells Earth he might have just united both types of dragons through his food. Back at the wild dragon's kingdom, the pathetic baby is fed the food that was brought. Several days later, the green dragon tries to cook, but bro ends up cooking nonsense. Meanwhile, another green dragon spies on him. Earth wakes up to find the fairy queen sleeping by his side. He whacks the sleep out of her and wakes her up. Shortly after, Earth walks into town and everybody salutes him like he's just killed Thanos. Earth particularly doesn't like the attention. Suddenly, a man named Ema walks up to him and asks if he's Earth, but Earth's lying ass denies it. Earth can tell from the man's aura that he's another wild dragon and chooses not to get into another dragon soap opera. He leaves the man and continues walking. Shortly after, Ema and the fairy queen show up, and Ema tells him he's indeed Earth. Feeling uncomfortable, Earth jumps and tries to run away from them like a thief who's just stolen a precious diamond. Ema and the queen chase after him, but they can't catch up. Earth manages to escape into an inn and then a room which he logs off. Later that day, he wakes up and goes out only to find his ugly face plastered everywhere as a wanted man. He becomes infuriated and visits the fairy queen and Ema, steaming like a volcano about to erupt. He scolds the queen and tells her she's taken it too far. She tries to explain, but Earth doesn't give her the chance. He asks her to take the goddamn ring off his finger. He also commands Ema to leave him and the town, and he's not interested in cooking for any dragon. Ema challenges him to a fight outside, and Earth threatens to blast a hole in his smug face. Outside, Ema transforms into a green dragon. Ema tells him it'll be dishonorable for a dragon like him to strike a human first, so he asks Earth to strike first. Earth launches an arrow twister attack at him, but it just tickles the dragon. Ema counters, but Earth dodges by jumping up, but Ema is quick to smack his ass back to the ground. He gets up and launches a twin-fanged arrow attack, but it doesn't do shit. Ema attacks back, but Earth parries, which ends up breaking his beloved shield. Ema is surprised that Earth is still alive. He tries to finish Earth off by opening his mouth like a hungry lion to breathe out the fire, but Earth throws some explosives into his mouth, causing some damage. Realizing he's caused some damage, he utilizes one of the special attack techniques the fairy queen had given him earlier, 7 falling stars. This causes some damage, but Ema is a stubborn bastard and doesn't back down. Earth uses a wind booster to escape, and then utilizes the second skill the fairy queen has given him. This attack is extremely demanding and will even kill the user with it. Earth launches the attack at Ema, which substantially damages him. Earth then finishes him off by throwing multiple explosives at him, turning him into a mini fireworks fiesta. He eventually kills Ema, much to the surprise of the game executives. He dies too. The red dragon appears and revives Earth. The dragon reveals to him that Ema threatened to destroy the fairy kingdom if she didn't put out a warrant for him. They also appreciate Earth for beating the shit out of Ema and killing him. For the cooking he made earlier, the dragons compensate him with some rewards. He heads over to the fairy queen at the fairy kingdom. At this point, she feels like a walking corpse and doesn't look like herself. Earth tells her he's aware of the threat made to her and that he understands why she did it. He also apologizes for overreacting like a spoiled child. She also apologizes for the trouble she's brought him all the while. He also appreciates her for making him feel welcome earlier. Both parties settle, and Earth bids farewell to the fairy kingdom.